The Parachute Regiment was without a heritage, being spawned at the fulcrum of the 20th century in Britain, in June 1940, as France surrendered to the Nazis and continental Europe reached an uneasy peace. Winston Churchill, taking office after the parliamentary crisis that deposed Neville Chamberlain, asked on the 5th of June for a corps of 5,000 parachutists. After a faltering start, the numbers grew, and in 1942 the Parachute Regiment was born. The parachute battalions created their own independent ethos. That ethos became a tradition, a very powerful one. The two most important elements in the Parachute Regiment's reputation were first, that they were capable of going to extreme lengths, willing to accept tasks that other regiments would not, and secondly, that they were meritocratic, a unique band of brothers whose spirit reached across the ranks. Who were the paratroopers? In 1940, they stood for Britain's fighting will at the time of its deepest peril. After the Second World War, they were tasked with managing the difficult winding down of the British Empire. In the 1970s, they were deployed in Northern Ireland, and their operations in the province brought them into the public eye. Great Britain was forged from the threat of invasion and experience of war, and Britain grew great on expansion, in part made good by war. In the 20th century, Britain was twice a key participant in total world war. Despite the obvious importance of war to Britain's history, the British saw themselves as an unmilitary nation. In 1941, George Orwell characterised their unmilitary nature. He said the British would not tolerate a military despot. The jackboot and the goose-step would not make them quail, but laugh. The roots of the British people's non-military perception of themselves were geographic, but also social. Britain was an island, its power was naval, and it had not been invaded. It kept a small standing army. Britain's state was liberal and did not compel its subjects into uniform, except under threat to its survival. These features distinguished Britain from America and France, both republics created from revolution and war, and for whom military service was linked to a civic as well as patriotic pride, and obviously separated Britain from Germany, who had taken too zealous an interest in its military prowess. Britain's armed services had political influence, but were formally separate from politics. They took instruction from government in Parliament, but their allegiance was to the monarch, a long-standing historical tradition which, it was thought, helped to avoid their becoming too politicised. The armed services were therefore vital, but at the same time not central, to Britain's national life. All three armed services were woven into the fabric of British society and traditionally connected to the principal institutions, public schools, the church, landed county families, that nourished the careers of Britain's aristocracy and gentry. However, the armed services did not dominate the British upper middle classes. Military service, perhaps particularly army service, was always slightly looked down upon. Between 1870 and 1959, the majority of men in the rank of officer were not from the really great ruling families, but lesser landowners, senior administrators, soldiers and independent professionals, the supporting class. More often than not, a career in the army was viewed as the pastime of somewhat eccentric figures, or of families who liked the trappings of gentlemanly life, uniforms, medals, and the imposed formalities of rank, but who lacked the means or the breeding to achieve it in ways that were less physically demanding. The Second World War, and the period of conscription that followed it, stood out as an unusual and an extraordinarily influential period in British history. As in 1916, conscription resulted from the enormous centralisation of power and mobilisation of resources necessary to defeat Germany. To win the war, Britain needed to compel ordinary men, shopkeepers, mechanics, teachers, factory workers, to join the services, sometimes to spend long months polishing buttons and shining boots in army barracks, sometimes to fight.